Officer Wilson smirked as Judge Raymond Thompson collapsed against the witness stand. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Nobody expected the distinguished black federal oversight agent to produce the hidden dashcam footage that would destroy not just one corrupt cop, but an entire police department's darkest secret. Where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of justice prevailing against systemic racism. What would you do if you witnessed an officer planting evidence? Let's dive into how one corrupt cop's actions unleashed a reckoning nobody saw coming. Raymond Thompson wasn't your average 73-year-old grandfather, with his silver-speckled beard penetrating dark eyes that missed nothing and the measured gait of someone who had spent 3 decades commanding respect from a federal bench. He carried himself with quiet dignity. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Raymond drove his immaculate Navy Lincoln Continental to pick up his 8-year-old grandson Marcus from Lincoln Elementary School in Millfield. This routine had become the highlight of his week since retiring from his prestigious position as a federal judge, though he still consulted part-time as an oversight agent reviewing police departments with histories of racial profiling. His daughter Andrea, a brilliant architect raising Marcus alone after her husband's death 3 years ago, relied on Raymond's help with school pickups while she established her growing practice. Raymond's credentials were impeccable. Harvard Law graduate with honors 30 years on the federal bench where he'd earned a reputation for fairness and insight, and now working to ensure law enforcement agencies upheld the constitutional rights of all citizens. Millfield had seemed like the perfect place for Raymond to settle near his daughter and grandson, a mid-sized city with good schools and growing diversity. But beneath the surface, racial tensions were brewing. The Millfield Police Department had recently come under scrutiny after several incidents involving excessive force against black residents, which was precisely why Raymond had been quietly consulting on a federal review of their practices. On this particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled across the school parking lot, Raymond noticed Officer James Wilson watching him from a patrol car. Raymond recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times during his career. Wilson, a stocky white man with a military-style crew cut and perpetual scowl, had been with the Millfield Police Department for 15 years. At 42, Wilson had hit a ceiling in his career, passed over repeatedly for promotions due to his growing file of civilian complaints, particularly from black residents who reported harassment during routine stops. What nobody knew was that Wilson secretly led an unofficial group of officers who resisted diversity initiatives and resented the increasing oversight from outsiders. As Raymond helped Marcus into the back seat, securing his seatbelt and listening to his grandson's excited chatter about the science project they were planning, he noticed Wilson's patrol car pulling out behind them. For 3 miles, Wilson followed at a consistent distance, waiting until they turned onto a quieter residential street before activating his lights. Raymond pulled over immediately, his hands visible on the steering wheel as Wilson approached. "License and registration," Wilson demanded without explanation or greeting. "May I ask why you've pulled me over, officer?" Raymond inquired with the calm precision of someone who had spent his life in courtrooms. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," Wilson said, though there had been no stop sign on their route. Raymond knew better than to argue. "My license is in my wallet and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." Wilson's posture stiffened as he scrutinized Raymond's driver's license. "Judge Thompson, what's a federal judge doing in Millfield?" The question carried an edge of suspicion rather than respect. "I'm retired from the bench," Raymond explained. "My daughter and grandson live here. I'm just picking my grandson up from school." Wilson's eyes narrowed as he glanced at 8-year-old Marcus wide-eyed in the back seat. "Step out of the car, please." What should have been a routine stop, if it had been justified at all, quickly escalated as Wilson ordered Raymond to sit on the curb while he checked a few things. As Raymond complied, maintaining his dignity despite the humiliation of sitting curbside while neighbors drove past, Wilson returned to the car. What Wilson didn't realize was that his dash cam was recording as he slipped a small bag of white powder beneath the driver's seat, a practiced motion that suggested this wasn't his first time planting evidence. Just as Wilson was completing his fabricated discovery, a second patrol car pulled up. Officer Chen, 26, and only 8 months into her job with the department, approached with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Chen, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had raised her to believe in American justice, had joined the force with idealistic notions about serving her community. "Everything okay here?" she asked, observing the elderly black man sitting on the curb and the tense posture of her colleague. "Got another dealer," Wilson announced with satisfaction. "Found this under his seat." Chen frowned slightly. Something about the situation not sitting right with her training or instincts. "Sir, are these your drugs?" Wilson demanded of Raymond. "Absolutely not," Raymond stated firmly. "Those are not mine, and I believe they were not in my vehicle until Officer Wilson searched it." Wilson's face flushed with anger. "Are you accusing me of something? Stand up, you're under arrest." As Wilson roughly handcuffed Raymond, despite no resistance, Marcus began crying from the back seat. "Grandpa, Grandpa!" Chen, visibly uncomfortable, approached the child. "Hey there, it's going to be okay. We need to call your mom. Do you know her number?" As Raymond was placed in Wilson's patrol car, he maintained eye contact with his terrified grandson. "Call your mother, Marcus. Tell her to contact Michael Dawson." Wilson slammed the door, cutting off Raymond's instructions. Chen stood frozen, caught between protocol and the disturbing sense that something was deeply wrong with this arrest. She watched Wilson drive away with Raymond Thompson in the back seat, while she was left to deal with a sobbing child and a gnawing feeling that she had just witnessed something that went against everything she had sworn to uphold. The booking process at Millfield Police Department stripped Raymond Thompson of more than just his possessions. Despite his age and distinguished career, he was processed like any common criminal, fingerprinted, photographed, holding a number plate, and subjected to the indignity of a body search. "Judge Thompson, huh?" sneered the booking officer, a heavy-set man with a receding hairline who seemed to take particular pleasure in the situation. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" Raymond remained silent, preserving his energy and dignity as his belt shoelaces and personal items were confiscated. The holding cell was cold, the bench uncomfortable for his arthritic hip, but Raymond's mind was racing with legal strategy rather than self-pity. Across town, Andrea Thompson nearly dropped her phone when she received Marcus's tearful call. They arrested Grandpa, a police officer, put him in a car, and took him away. Her son's words seemed impossible, incomprehensible. Andrea immediately canceled her client meeting and rushed to pick up Marcus, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. As a black woman raising a son alone, she had already had difficult conversations with Marcus about police interactions, but she never imagined her father, a retired federal judge, would become the example. "He said to call Mr. Dawson?" Marcus hiccuped between sobs when Andrea arrived. Michael Dawson answered on the first ring. The 35-year-old civil rights attorney had worked with Judge Thompson on several cases before the judge's retirement and considered him a mentor. "They did what?" Dawson's voice rose in disbelief. "I'm on my way to the station now." Chief Robert Brooks was reviewing budget proposals when the notification of Thompson's arrest crossed his desk. At 50, Brooks had spent 25 years in law enforcement, the last 3 as Millfield's police chief. He prided himself on running a professional department, though he privately acknowledged the challenges of changing entrenched cultures. Wilson arrested a former federal judge. Brooks frowned immediately, recognizing the potential public relations disaster. "Get me the details on this now." Meanwhile, Officer Chen sat in her patrol car reviewing the dashcam footage before filing her report. Standard procedure required her to document her role as a responding officer. As she watched the video, her blood ran cold. The camera had captured a clear image of Wilson reaching into his pocket and placing something beneath the driver's seat before discovering it moments later. Chen stared at the screen, then played it again, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't a misunderstanding or procedural error. It was a criminal act by a fellow officer. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts, her duty to report misconduct, the unwritten code of loyalty among officers, and the certain retaliation she would face for exposing Wilson, who had friends throughout the department. In the holding cell, Raymond wasn't alone for long. 2 other men joined him over the next hour, both black, both arrested by Wilson or his close associates. "You got caught up in Wilson's web too, huh?" said one, a contractor in his 40s named Dexter. "That man's been targeting folks in our community for years. Nobody believes us when we say he plants evidence." The second man, barely 20, nodded in agreement. "My cousin lost his scholarship because of a bogus possession charge last year. Same thing, Wilson pulls him over. Next thing you know, there's drugs in the car that weren't there before." Raymond listened intently, gathering information that confirmed his suspicions about systemic issues within the department. Andrea secured emergency childcare for Marcus with a neighbor, then drove straight to the police station with a determination born of both fear and anger. The desk sergeant's dismissive attitude changed slightly when she mentioned her father's former position, but the response remained the same. "He's being processed for drug possession. You can't see him until after arraignment." Michael Dawson arrived 20 minutes later, briefcase in hand, and righteous indignation barely contained beneath his professional demeanor. "I'm representing Judge Raymond Thompson, who has been unlawfully arrested. I demand to see my client immediately." His law firm specialized in civil rights cases, and he'd faced police obstruction before, but never involving someone of Raymond's stature. As Andrea and Dawson strategized in hushed tones in the station lobby, Wilson was gathering his allies in the break room. "The old man was carrying plain and simple," he told 3 officers who frequently worked his shift. "Probably thinks being a judge puts him above the law. Good thing we showed him otherwise." Officer Brady Wilson's most loyal supporter nodded in agreement. About time someone took these people down a peg. Officer Reynolds looked less convinced but stayed silent. Chief Brooks called Wilson into his office an hour later. "Tell me exactly what happened with Judge Thompson." Wilson delivered his rehearsed story smoothly. Routine traffic stop, suspicious behavior, discovered contraband. "You realize who this man is, right? The potential blowback on the department?" Brooks asked, studying Wilson's face. "Being a judge doesn't give him license to break the law," Wilson replied with practiced righteousness. "I was just doing my job." As Wilson left the office, Chen waited nervously in the hallway, having requested a private meeting with the chief. "What is it, Chen?" Brooks asked when Wilson was out of earshot. "Sir, I was second on the scene for Judge Thompson's arrest, and I've reviewed the dashcam footage." She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "The footage shows Officer Wilson planting evidence in Judge Thompson's vehicle." Brooks's expression darkened. "That's a serious accusation against a senior officer, Chen. Are you absolutely certain of what you saw?" When Chen nodded, Brooks sighed heavily. "Don't discuss this with anyone. I need to review the footage myself before we proceed. This stays between us for now." Chen left, feeling both relieved and uneasy about the chief's response. The bail hearing the next morning was tense and revealing. Despite Raymond's impeccable record and deep community ties, the prosecutor argued for a high bail amount, citing the seriousness of drug charges. Michael Dawson was eloquent in his outrage. "Your Honor, we're talking about a 73-year-old retired federal judge with no criminal history arrested while picking up his grandson from school. The circumstances of this arrest are highly suspicious, and we have reason to believe evidence was fabricated." Judge Simmons, a contemporary of Raymond's who knew him by reputation, set a reasonable bail that Andrea was able to post immediately. As Raymond walked out of the courthouse with his daughter and attorney, reporters were already gathering, sensing a story. "Judge Thompson, do you believe you were targeted because of your race?" shouted one. "No comment at this time." Dawson intervened, ushering his client to Andrea's car. Raymond was finally free, but his reputation was under attack. His grandson was traumatized, and the fight for justice was just beginning. What would you do if you were framed by the very people sworn to protect and serve? Comment number 1, if you believe Officer Wilson should be immediately suspended, or number 2, if you think we should wait for the full investigation. Like and subscribe to follow this shocking story of justice perverted and the fight to restore it. How far do you think this corruption extends in the Millfield Police Department? Raymond Thompson sat in Michael Dawson's downtown office, a space decorated with framed newspaper articles about civil rights victories and photographs of Dawson with prominent activists. "They picked the wrong man to frame," Raymond stated, his voice measured but resolute. "This isn't just about clearing my name. This pattern of behavior has likely affected dozens of people without my resources or connections." Dawson nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "I've already filed motions to preserve all evidence, including the dashcam footage. We need to move quickly before anything conveniently disappears." Andrea, who had taken the day off work, paced the office. "Dad, I'm worried about your health. This kind of stress at your age—" Raymond cut her off gently. "I spent 30 years on the bench watching young black men enter the system based on questionable evidence. If I walk away because it's personally uncomfortable, what message does that send to Marcus? Some fights choose you." Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own battle at school. Word had spread about his grandfather's arrest, and the cruel logic of elementary school social hierarchies meant he was now a target. "My dad says your grandpa is a drug dealer," taunted the son of a police department administrator during recess. Marcus, usually good-natured and quick to smile, had become withdrawn and jumpy. His teacher noticed the change and tried to create a supportive environment, but the damage was already evident in his falling grades and reluctance to participate in class discussions. At the police station, Officer Chen felt the weight of Wilson's stare as she entered the briefing room. "Heard you were asking questions about the Thompson arrest," he said, cornering her in the break room later that day. "Just making sure my report is accurate," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Wilson stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Word of advice, rookie. Some things don't need to be in reports. Cops who can't be trusted to stay quiet don't last long here." Chen said nothing, but as soon as her shift ended, she made a copy of the dashcam footage onto a secure flash drive. The original file in the department system had already been flagged as corrupted, exactly as she feared. Dawson's paralegal, Zoe Washington, had been researching Wilson's arrest history. "We've identified 7 cases in the past 18 months with similarities to Judge Thompson's," she reported. "All black men, all stopped for minor traffic violations or no clear reason, all charged with possession based on evidence found during searches. 5 pled guilty rather than risk trial." Raymond reviewed the cases, noting patterns that sent chills down his spine. "The 2 who fought the charges received unusually harsh sentences," he observed. "That's how the system perpetuates itself, make the consequences of fighting back so severe that most accept the injustice." Raymond's connections from his time on the federal bench were proving valuable. A discreet call to a former colleague had resulted in FBI agent Diana Wells being assigned to look into potential civil rights violations within the Millfield Police Department. Wells, a 40-year-old veteran agent with expertise in police misconduct cases, arranged to meet Raymond and Dawson at a coffee shop outside town. "The Bureau has had concerns about Millfield PD for some time," Wells admitted, keeping her voice low. "Your case might be the key to opening a broader investigation. We need evidence of the pattern, not just a single incident." Word of the FBI's interest spread quickly through the department's grapevine. Wilson and his closest allies gathered at a bar far from Millfield to discuss strategy. "We need to discredit Thompson before this gets out of hand," Wilson insisted, his third beer making him less cautious about who might overhear. "Dig into his past, find something. Everybody's got dirt." Officer Brady suggested planting rumors about Thompson's mental acuity, playing on stereotypes about elderly black men. Officer Reynolds, increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, excused himself early unnoticed in the group's growing paranoia. The threats began 3 days after Raymond's release. First, a brick through Andrea's living room window with a note, "Drop the case or drop dead." then late-night calls with nothing but breathing on the other end. Chief Brooks assigned a patrol car to drive by the house periodically, but Raymond suspected it was more for show than protection. The stress was taking its toll on the family. Marcus woke screaming from nightmares where police officers chased him through endless dark corridors. Andrea found herself jumping at every unexpected sound. Raymond's blood pressure, normally well controlled, was concerning his doctor enough to adjust his medication. Yet as the pressure mounted, so did Raymond's determination. In 30 years on the bench, I saw how the system breaks people down until they accept injustice as inevitable, he told Dawson during a strategy session. That's not happening to my family. Dawson had been building a network of former defendants in Wilson's cases. People are afraid to come forward, he admitted, but we've got 3 willing to testify about similar experiences. All had drugs found in their vehicles during stops. All insist the drugs weren't theirs. Chen had been researching whistleblower protections, spending hours online after shifts learning about her options. The department's internal affairs had a reputation for protecting officers rather than investigating them, and going directly to the FBI could end her career before it really began. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw Raymond Thompson sitting on that curb, his dignity intact despite the humiliation, and his terrified grandson watching from the car. Community activists, led by Pastor Jerome Williams of First Baptist Church, had organized a support rally for Raymond outside the courthouse. "This isn't just about one man or one corrupt officer," Pastor Williams told the crowd of several hundred. "This is about a system that presumes guilt based on skin color. Today we stand with Judge Thompson, tomorrow with every person who has faced this injustice." Chief Brooks watched news coverage of the rally from his office, his expression unreadable. 15 years from retirement, Brooks had hoped to maintain peace in the department while gradually implementing reforms. Now he faced a crisis that threatened to tear Millfield PD apart. The evidence against Wilson was damning, but moving against a popular veteran officer would create a revolt within his ranks. Yet failing to act courted federal intervention that would remove control from his hands entirely. As the 2-week mark since the arrest passed, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Raymond Thompson, backed by his attorney community supporters and potentially the FBI, stood against an entrenched system of racial profiling and evidence manipulation. Officer Wilson, protecting both his career and freedom, had allies willing to go to extreme lengths to preserve the status quo. And caught in the middle were people like Officer Chen and Chief Brooks, forced to choose between professional loyalty and moral obligation. The question now wasn't just whether justice would prevail, but how many lives would be damaged in the process. The unmarked police cruiser crawled past Andrea Thompson's house for the 3rd time that evening, slowing just enough for the occupants to stare menacingly at the front door before accelerating away. Inside, Raymond watched through a gap in the curtains, noting the vehicle's number plate, despite the mud partially obscuring it. "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore," he remarked to Andrea, who was helping Marcus with homework at the kitchen table. This intimidation campaign had been escalating over the past week since word spread that the FBI was investigating Wilson and potentially other officers in the department. Wilson had organized what he called special attention patrols of neighborhoods where witnesses against him lived, particularly in predominantly black areas of Millfield. Cars would cruise slowly past homes. Officers would stop residents for trivial or invented infractions, and the message was clear: cooperation with the investigation would have consequences. Raymond had anticipated resistance, but the breadth of the response suggested Wilson's influence extended further than one corrupt officer and a few close allies. Former colleagues from Raymond's days on the bench had grown distant, not returning calls or finding excuses to cancel lunch meetings. Andrea's firm had suddenly lost a major municipal contract with no explanation. Even Marcus's principal had suggested perhaps another school might be a better fit given the circumstances. After an incident where the child of a police officer had shoved Marcus into a wall, resulting in a bloody nose. Chen had discovered her locker vandalized personal items soaked with what smelled like urine and a crude note warning, "Rats drown first." She'd reported it to her supervisor, who had simply advised her to be more careful about making enemies. The few officers who'd initially shown her sympathy now avoided eye contact in the hallways, fearful of being associated with her. Dawson arrived at his office one morning to find the door lock broken and files scattered across the floor. The only items missing were those related to Raymond's case and similar complaints against the police department. The break-in was reported, but the investigating officers spent more time questioning Dawson about his clients than looking for evidence. "They're closing ranks," Dawson told Raymond during a secure call using a burner phone he'd purchased specifically for this purpose. "And they're putting pressure on everyone connected to the case. The FBI investigation keeps hitting roadblocks, evidence disappearing, witnesses suddenly recanting statements." Despite these obstacles, community support was growing. A town hall meeting organized by Pastor Williams drew over 400 people, many sharing similar stories of questionable arrests and planted evidence. "I lost my job and my apartment after Officer Wilson claimed he found drugs in my car," testified Jamal Lewis, a 32-year-old electrician. "I couldn't afford bail, so I sat in jail for 3 weeks before taking a plea deal just to get out, even though those drugs weren't mine. Now I have a record that follows me everywhere." More voices joined, revealing a pattern that spanned years, primarily targeting black residents, often resulting in property seizures or leveraged plea deals. The story strengthened Raymond's resolve, but also highlighted the personal cost of his stand against the system. That night, sitting alone in Andrea's guest room, Raymond confronted his doubts. His blood pressure medication had been doubled, the constant stress taking a physical toll. Was he putting his family at too much risk? Would the system that had protected Wilson for years simply close ranks and prevail again? Andrea found him there, staring at old family photographs. "You're wondering if we should back down," she said. Not a question, but an observation. "I've been thinking the same thing. Marcus is having nightmares every night." Raymond nodded slowly. "If it were just about clearing my name, I'd walk away. But Dawson has connected Wilson's arrests to property seizures, targeting black homeowners in developing areas. There's something bigger happening here." Andrea sat beside her father, their shoulders touching. "When Mom was dying, she made me promise to never let you face anything alone. We're in this together, whatever you decide." The next morning brought a breakthrough. Dawson discovered a pattern in Wilson's arrests. They disproportionately occurred in neighborhoods where development companies had later purchased properties at below-market rates after owners couldn't make bail or legal payments. The connection was still circumstantial, but it suggested corruption beyond racial targeting. Chen had been approached by Officer Reynolds, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Wilson's tactics. "I've never planted evidence myself," Reynolds confessed in a whispered conversation in the parking garage, "but I've looked the other way. Thompson's arrest was the tipping point for me. Wilson's getting desperate and dangerous." Brooks found himself similarly conflicted. His attempt to view the original dashcam footage had been blocked by technical issues, and his queries about Wilson's arrest record were met with administrative delays from departments that usually responded promptly. The signs of a cover-up were unmistakable, but taking action would likely end his career and possibly more. Raymond's health crisis came suddenly. During a meeting with Dawson and Wells, he clutched his chest, his breathing labored and face ashen. The hospital diagnosed a minor heart attack brought on by stress and hypertension. The doctors recommended rest and reduced stress, impossible prescriptions given the circumstances. As Raymond lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around him, Andrea and Marcus keeping vigil at his side, he made his decision. The fight would continue, regardless of personal cost. The system that had protected Wilson and others like him relied on wearing down opposition, on making the price of resistance so high that capitulation seemed the only reasonable choice. But Raymond Thompson had spent his career upholding justice, and he wouldn't abandon that principle now. not when so many without his resources and connections had suffered under the same corrupt practices. When he was released from the hospital 3 days later, Raymond returned home with renewed purpose and a clear understanding of the opposition's strategy and strength. Wilson and his allies would continue escalating pressure, counting on fear and exhaustion to end the challenge to their power. What they failed to realize was that each act of intimidation only strengthened the resolve of those fighting back and brought new allies to the cause. The true turning point was approaching, though none of the participants yet recognized its shape or timing. What they did know was that the confrontation had moved beyond one arrest or one corrupt officer. It had become a battle for the soul of justice in Millfield, with implications that would reach far beyond the city limits. The morning dawned with a heavy mist hanging over Millfield, an appropriate backdrop for the decision Officer Chen had finally reached after another sleepless night. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the flash drive containing the copied dashcam footage into an envelope along with her sworn statement. She had watched that footage dozens of times. Wilson clearly reaching into his pocket, the practiced motion as he planted the small bag under the driver's seat, the theatrical discovery moments later. No amount of intimidation or department pressure could change what she had witnessed with her own eyes. Chen's decision to officially come forward wasn't made in isolation. The previous day she had visited Raymond in his home, still recovering from his heart attack. "I should have spoken up immediately," she admitted, her voice tight with emotion. "I've been afraid of losing my job, my career." Raymond had regarded her with compassion rather than judgment. Fear is how corrupt systems maintain power. The question isn't whether you were afraid, it's what you choose to do despite that fear. Now, as Chen walked into Chief Brooks's office and placed the envelope on his desk, she felt a strange calm replace her anxiety. "This is my official statement regarding Officer Wilson's actions during Judge Thompson's arrest, along with a copy of the unaltered dashcam footage. I'm also submitting this to the FBI and the District Attorney's Office." Brooks's expression remained carefully neutral as he accepted the envelope. "You understand the implications of this step, Officer Chen?" "Yes, sir, I do." Word of Chen's action spread through the department like wildfire. By noon, Wilson had confronted her in the locker room, his face contorted with rage. "You stupid bitch!" he hissed, backing her against the wall. "You have no idea what you've done." Officer Rodriguez intervened before the situation escalated further, but the threat lingered in the air. By the end of her shift, Chen found a transfer order on her desk, administrative leave, pending investigation of procedural violations. Brooks called her into his office to explain. "This is for your protection, Chen. Things are going to get ugly, and I can't guarantee your safety in the department right now." Chen wasn't naive enough to believe the official explanation entirely, but she recognized that Brooks was navigating a minefield of departmental politics and potential legal exposure. Her administrative leave might be punishment protection, or most likely both. Dawson wasted no time leveraging Chen's evidence, filing emergency motions with the court based on the new evidence. "We have absolute proof that the arresting officer planted evidence and fabricated charges against my client," he argued before Judge Washington. "All charges against Judge Thompson should be dismissed immediately, and a criminal investigation into Officer Wilson should be launched." The prosecution requested time to review the new evidence, a delay tactic that Dawson vehemently opposed. "Every day these fraudulent charges remain, my client's reputation suffers irreparable damage." Raymond had meanwhile connected with Vanessa Powell, an investigative journalist with the Millfield Tribune, who had previously covered police misconduct cases. "This isn't just about one arrest," Raymond explained during their 3-hour interview. "It's about a pattern of targeting black residents, fabricating evidence, and forcing plea deals that destroy lives and livelihoods." Powell's resulting front-page exposé caught national attention, with cable news networks picking up the story. Retired federal judge claims systemic racism and evidence planting in Millfield Police Department became a trending topic on social media platforms. The FBI investigation gained momentum with Chen's evidence and testimony. Agent Wells expanded her team, interviewing current and former officers about departmental practices. The blue wall of silence showed cracks as junior officers, inspired by Chen's courage, began sharing their own observations of misconduct. 3 officers who frequently worked with Wilson suddenly requested transfers to other departments. The pressure was affecting Wilson both professionally and personally. His wife, Carla, who had initially stood by him, began asking uncomfortable questions after seeing the news reports. "They're saying you planted drugs on an old man picking up his grandson," she confronted him one evening. "Tell me that's not true, James." His non-answer and subsequent rage told her everything she needed to know. 2 days later, she took their children to her mother's house, not saying when they would return. Andrea's employer, initially wavering under police pressure, received an outpouring of community support after her situation was highlighted in Powell's article. The architectural firm's partners called Andrea to apologize and reinstate her on their major projects. "We should have stood with you from the beginning," the senior partner admitted. "Your father's fight is important for all of us." At Lincoln Elementary, Marcus found unexpected support from his teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez, who had created a classroom discussion about justice and standing up for truth. Without directly mentioning Marcus's situation, she had fostered an environment where several students approached him with messages of support. "My mom says your grandpa is a hero," whispered Lily, a quiet girl who rarely spoke up in class. The preliminary hearing date was set with Judge Harriet Washington presiding. Known for her no-nonsense approach and commitment to constitutional rights, Washington had denied the prosecution's request for further delays. The evidence presented by the defense raises serious concerns about the integrity of this arrest. This court will not be party to perpetuating a potential injustice. While Raymond prepared for the hearing with Dawson Wells, brought him additional information that expanded the scope of the investigation dramatically. "We've found a connection between Wilson's targeted arrests and property seizures in predominantly black neighborhoods. 3 development companies have been purchasing these properties at below-market rates after the owners face legal troubles. The pattern suggested corruption beyond racial targeting, a coordinated effort to facilitate gentrification through fraudulent arrests and asset seizures. Raymond worked with his federal contacts to expand the investigation's scope, requesting financial audits of the development companies and their potential connections to the police department or city officials. The community continued rallying around Raymond's case. Pastor Williams organized a peaceful march from his church to the courthouse steps, drawing over 1,000 participants. Signs reading, "Justice for Judge Thompson" and "End Police Corruption" filled the streets as speakers shared personal experiences with police misconduct. Chief Brooks watched the coverage from his office, his decision already made but not yet announced. The turning point had arrived not as a single dramatic moment, but as the culmination of countless small acts of courage. Chen stepping forward with evidence, Reynolds breaking ranks to provide information, community members speaking their truth despite intimidation, and Raymond himself refusing to accept injustice despite the personal cost. The system designed to protect corruption was powerful, but its greatest vulnerability had been exposed. It required universal compliance and silence to function. One voice speaking truth could inspire others, and a chorus of truth became impossible to silence. As Raymond prepared for bed the night before the hearing, his phone rang with an unknown number. "Judge Thompson," said a voice he didn't recognize. "This is Officer Stanley from Internal Affairs. We need to talk about what's been happening in our department. There's more corruption than you know, and I have documentation." The walls protecting Wilson and his allies were crumbling from within, and the full scope of Millfield's police corruption was about to be exposed to the harsh light of judicial scrutiny. What would you do if you witnessed a corrupt officer planting evidence? Comment number 1. If you would immediately report it like Officer Chen, or number 2, if you would stay silent to protect your career. Hit that like button and subscribe to see what happens next in this shocking courtroom showdown. Will Officer Wilson's lies hold up under the scrutiny of the justice system? The Millfield County Courthouse stood as an imposing limestone monument to justice, its columns and high windows designed to inspire awe and respect for the law. Today, those same columns served as backdrop for dozens of protesters carrying signs supporting Raymond Thompson and demanding police accountability. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers. Inside Courtroom 3, Judge Harriet Washington adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the case files before her. At 60, Washington had earned a reputation for fairness and a low tolerance for procedural games. The preliminary hearing was set to begin at 9, and she intended to maintain tight control over what promised to be a contentious proceeding. Raymond entered with Dawson at his side, his posture straight despite the health challenges of recent weeks. He nodded respectfully to the judge, his courtroom etiquette ingrained from decades on the bench. Andrea and Marcus sat in the front row behind the defense table, Marcus looking uncomfortable in his rarely worn suit, but determined to support his grandfather. The prosecution team was led by Assistant District Attorney Patrick Holden, a career prosecutor known for his close relationship with law enforcement. His discomfort was evident as he shuffled papers and whispered urgently to his associates. The state's case had been built entirely on Wilson's testimony and the seized evidence, both now compromised by Chen's dashcam revelation. Wilson sat at the prosecution table, his expression alternating between defiance and anxiety. 3 rows behind him sat a group of off-duty officers, their presence a silent statement of solidarity with their colleague. Officer Chen entered just before proceedings began, escorted by Agent Wells. Their appearance caused a stir among the police contingent, with muttered comments and hostile glares directed at Chen. Judge Washington gavelled the court to order precisely at 9. This preliminary hearing will address the charges against Raymond Thompson as well as defense motions regarding alleged misconduct in the collection of evidence. Mr. Holden, is the state prepared to proceed? Holden stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, the state requests a continuance to allow for proper examination of newly submitted evidence that may bear on this case. Judge Washington's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Holden, this newly submitted evidence has been in your possession for over a week. The defense provided proper notice. Motion denied. Please proceed with your case. Holden's opening statement attempted to salvage what he could from the deteriorating case. Your Honor, regardless of any procedural irregularities that may have occurred during the arrest, the fact remains that illegal substances were found in the defendant's vehicle. The state maintains that these substances belong to Mr. Thompson and will prove this beyond reasonable doubt. Dawson's opening was concise and devastating. Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate not only that the evidence against my client was planted by Officer James Wilson in a flagrant violation of my client's constitutional rights, but that this represents part of a pattern of similar misconduct targeting black citizens of Millfield. The dashcam footage, which the prosecution attempted to suppress as corrupted, clearly shows Officer Wilson planting evidence in Judge Thompson's vehicle. The first witness called was Raymond himself. As he took the stand and was sworn in, his demeanor was that of a man accustomed to the courtroom, though usually from a different vantage point. Raymond described the events of his arrest calmly, without embellishment or apparent anger. I was picking up my grandson from school, as I do twice weekly. Officer Wilson followed my vehicle for approximately 3 miles before initiating a traffic stop, claiming I had run a stop sign on a street where no stop sign exists. He detailed Wilson's increasingly aggressive behavior, the order to sit on the curb, and his certainty that the drugs allegedly found in his car were not there before Wilson's search. During cross-examination, Holden attempted to suggest that Raymond's distinguished career might have given him a sense of being above the law. Isn't it possible, Judge Thompson, that you simply believe the rules don't apply to someone of your stature? Raymond's response was measured but firm. Mr. Holden, I spent 30 years upholding the law equally for all who entered my courtroom. I believe in the rule of law perhaps more deeply than most. What I don't believe in is the abuse of power to target citizens based on their race. Wilson took the stand next, his testimony a study in contradiction and barely concealed racial animus. He claimed to have observed Raymond driving erratically, necessitating the stop. He described Raymond as belligerent and uncooperative, a characterization that even the officers present in the gallery knew contradicted Raymond's well-known temperament. When asked directly about the drugs found in the vehicle, Wilson's account became vague. "I observed a suspicious package under the driver's seat during my lawful search of the vehicle." "And how did you happen to look under the driver's seat, Officer Wilson?" Dawson asked during cross-examination. "Standard procedure during a traffic stop." Wilson replied, his jaw tightening. "You search under the driver's seat during routine traffic stops. Is that department policy?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "When the driver is acting suspiciously, yes." "And what suspicious behavior did Judge Thompson exhibit?" "Being a 73-year-old black man driving an expensive car while picking up his grandson from school." Judge Washington intervened. "Counsel, please refrain from editorializing in your questions." "Withdrawn, Your Honor. Officer Wilson, are you aware that your dashcam was functioning during this traffic stop?" The question visibly rattled Wilson, whose eyes darted briefly to Holden. "I was informed there were technical issues with the camera that day." "So you're unaware that the camera captured you removing something from your pocket and placing it under the driver's seat of Judge Thompson's car?" Dawson's question hung in the air as Wilson's face flushed red. "That's not what happened. The footage must have been tampered with." The most damaging testimony came from Officer Chen, who described arriving at the scene and her growing discomfort with Wilson's conduct. "I observed Officer Wilson's behavior and felt it was inconsistent with our training and department policy. The level of aggression toward an elderly man who was not resisting in any way concerned me." "And what did you observe on the dashcam footage, Officer Chen?" Dawson asked. "I clearly saw Officer Wilson remove a small package from his pocket and place it under the driver's seat before discovering it during his search." Holden's cross-examination attacked Chen's motives. "Officer Chen, isn't it true that you had previous disagreements with Officer Wilson, that this might be motivated by personal animosity?" Chen remained composed. "No, sir, I had no personal issues with Officer Wilson prior to this incident. My report is based solely on what I witnessed and what the camera recorded." As the first day of testimony concluded, Judge Washington addressed the matter of the dashcam footage. "The court will view this evidence in chambers. Both counsel will be present." The viewing proved devastating to the prosecution's case. The footage clearly showed exactly what Chen had described, Wilson planting evidence in Raymond's car. Upon returning to the courtroom, Judge Washington announced, "Based on the video evidence presented, the court has serious concerns about the integrity of the state's case. We will continue testimony tomorrow, but I am instructing the district attorney's office to investigate potential misconduct charges against Officer Wilson." Raymond returned home that evening, physically exhausted but legally encouraged. The expressions on the jurors' faces during Wilson's testimony suggested they found his account difficult to believe, and the judge's instruction to investigate Wilson represented a significant victory. As Andrea prepared a light dinner, Marcus sat with his grandfather in the living room. "Are you going to win, Grandpa?" he asked, his young face serious. Raymond considered his answer carefully. "In court, possibly. But the real victory would be changing a system that allowed this to happen in the first place. That's a much longer fight." The truth of that statement hung in the air between them. The acknowledgement that exposing one corrupt officer wouldn't address the institutional problems that had protected him for so long. But it was a necessary first step, and Raymond Thompson was prepared to see it through to whatever end awaited in Judge Washington's courtroom. The second week of trial brought heightened security to the Millfield County Courthouse. Metal detectors beeped continuously as spectators filed through the gallery, now consistently filled to capacity with community members, activists, and media. National civil rights organizations had sent representatives recognizing the case's potential impact on police accountability nationwide. Raymond arrived each morning with the same dignified composure, though friends noticed the toll the proceedings were taking, the slight tremor in his hands, the deeper lines etched around his eyes. Wilson's demeanor had changed dramatically since his disastrous testimony. Gone was the arrogant confidence, replaced by a hunted look as more officers from his own department distanced themselves from him. The prosecution's case continued to unravel as additional witnesses came forward. 3 former defendants arrested by Wilson testified about strikingly similar circumstances. Minor traffic stops escalating to searches where drugs mysteriously appeared. "I lost my job, my apartment, and 6 months of my life because I couldn't afford to fight the charges," testified Kevin Washington, a 34-year-old electrician. "I knew those drugs weren't mine, but who would believe me over a police officer?" The most damaging evidence came from unexpected sources within the department itself. Officer Reynolds, after securing limited immunity, testified about the informal group of officers led by Wilson who specifically targeted black residents in certain neighborhoods. There was an understanding that arrests in these areas would not be closely scrutinized. Reynolds admitted, unable to meet the eyes of his former colleagues in the gallery. Wilson called it cleaning up the neighborhood. The technological evidence proved equally devastating. FBI forensic specialists testified about text messages recovered from Wilson's phone, despite his attempts to delete them. "Got another one today," read one message to Officer Brady. "That's 3 this month in the West Side Development Zone." When questioned about the meaning, Wilson claimed they were referring to legitimate arrests, but the pattern of messages coinciding with questionable arrests in areas later subject to development projects suggested otherwise. Financial records presented by the FBI showed surprising connections. 3 development companies that had purchased properties from defendants arrested by Wilson or his close associates had made substantial contributions to a police benevolent fund controlled by department leadership. While not direct bribes, the financial relationships suggested a troubling alignment of interests. As the evidence mounted, more officers began accepting plea deals in exchange for testimony. Officer Brady, once Wilson's staunchest defender, provided details of how targeted arrests were coordinated. Wilson would identify properties in neighborhoods slated for redevelopment. If the owners or residents had any history with law enforcement, no matter how minor, they became targets. Chief Brooks faced the impossible choice between cooperating with investigators or potentially facing charges himself for failing to address misconduct under his command. He chose the former, testifying about how complaints against Wilson had been systematically minimized or buried before reaching his desk. The culture of the department made it difficult to discipline officers like Wilson who had strong support within the ranks, Brooks admitted. "I failed in my responsibility to ensure all officers upheld their oath equally for all citizens." Raymond's testimony connected his personal experience to the broader issues of systemic racism in policing. "What happened to me was not exceptional. It was exceptional only in that I had the resources and knowledge to fight back. How many others have been crushed by this same machinery of injustice without the ability to defend themselves?" The defense strategy shifted to portraying Raymond as an anti-police activist with a personal agenda. "Isn't it true, Judge Thompson, that you've been critical of law enforcement practices throughout your career?" the prosecution asked during cross-examination. "I've been critical of unconstitutional practices in all institutions, including law enforcement," Raymond replied. "The Constitution I swore to uphold protects everyone equally regardless of race or social position. Holding police accountable to that standard isn't anti-police. It's pro-justice." Marcus's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears as he described watching his grandfather being handcuffed and placed in a police car. "I was scared they were going to hurt him like I saw on the news happening to other black people." The 8-year-old said, his voice small but clear. "I didn't understand why they were treating Grandpa like a bad person when he teaches me to always tell the truth and be kind." Andrea described the family trauma that followed the arrest. "My son had nightmares for weeks. He was afraid to go to school where classmates taunted him about having a criminal grandfather. Our sense of safety in this community was shattered. Officer Chen faced particularly hostile questioning from the prosecution, attempting to paint her as naive or vindictive. Officer Chen, with your limited experience, isn't it possible you misinterpreted what you saw on the dashcam footage? The footage speaks for itself, Chen responded. There's no interpretation needed when you clearly see an officer placing something under a seat and then finding it moments later. Expert witnesses testified about racial profiling patterns in Millfield, presenting data showing black residents were 6 times more likely to be searched during traffic stops than white residents and 8 times more likely to be arrested for drug possession despite similar usage rates across racial groups. As the prosecution's case collapsed, Wilson's defense team grew increasingly desperate. Their final strategy was to present Wilson as a dedicated officer fighting crime with limited resources, occasionally cutting corners, but always with public safety in mind. This approach backfired spectacularly during Dawson's cross-examination. Officer Wilson, if your actions were motivated by concern for public safety rather than racial bias, can you explain why your arrest record shows such a stark racial disparity, or why your targets so frequently owned properties in areas later purchased by specific development companies? Wilson had no satisfactory answer, his credibility destroyed by the mountain of evidence and testimony against him. As the trial entered its final days, the broader implications became clear. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer or even one department, but about systems that enabled abuse and protected those who perpetuated it. Raymond, despite the personal cost, had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. The testimony evidence and public attention had created momentum for change that extended far beyond the outcome for Wilson himself. The night before closing arguments, Raymond sat on Andrea's porch watching the sunset with Marcus beside him. "Grandpa, my teacher says you're making history," Marcus said, leaning against Raymond's arm. "Is that true?" Raymond smiled, putting his arm around his grandson's shoulders. "What's true is that sometimes justice takes more courage than we think we have. The important thing isn't being remembered, it's doing what's right even when it's difficult." As darkness fell, Raymond contemplated the journey from that routine school pickup to this moment on the cusp of potential justice. Whatever the verdict, the truth had been exposed, and that truth had the power to begin healing wounds inflicted by years of systematic injustice. The conspiracy that had targeted vulnerable residents, violated constitutional rights, and corrupted the promise of equal justice was unraveling in full public view. For Raymond Thompson, that represented a victory that transcended his personal vindication. The courthouse fell silent as Officer James Wilson took the stand for his final testimony. The previous 3 weeks had transformed him. His uniform now hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the confident swagger had been replaced by nervous gestures. Defense attorney Leonard Graves attempted to rehabilitate his client's image with carefully crafted questions. "Officer Wilson, in your 15 years of service, what has been your primary motivation?" Wilson leaned toward the microphone, his voice hoarse from hours of testimony. "To protect the community, to keep dangerous elements from threatening law-abiding citizens. And in your experience, where do these dangerous elements typically originate?" The question was carefully constructed to avoid explicit racial language while invoking common stereotypes. "Objection," Dawson called immediately. "Counsel is leading the witness toward prejudicial generalization." "Sustained." Judge Washington ruled, her expression stern. "Rephrase, counselor." Graves adjusted his approach, guiding Wilson through a narrative of his career that emphasized drug arrests and commendations. Throughout this testimony, Wilson maintained that his actions with Raymond had been motivated by reasonable suspicion based on experience, not racial bias. When Dawson rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted palpably. His first question set the tone. "Officer Wilson, you testified that you approached Judge Thompson's vehicle based on reasonable suspicion. Can you explain what was suspicious about a 73-year-old man picking up his grandson from school? Wilson shifted uncomfortably. His behavior seemed nervous when he noticed my patrol car. So noticing police is now suspicious behavior, Dawson pressed. Not necessarily, but, in fact, Officer Wilson, isn't it true that you followed Judge Thompson's vehicle for 3 miles before finding a reason to stop him, that you were looking for any pretext to initiate that stop? Wilson's face flushed. I was performing my duties as I saw fit. Dawson methodically walked Wilson through the traffic stop, the search, and the planting of evidence, each question tightening the noose of contradictions around Wilson's testimony. Officer Wilson, you've denied planting evidence despite clear video showing otherwise. You've denied targeting black residents despite statistical evidence proving it. At what point does your testimony become credible? Objection, Graves shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Washington ruled. Mr. Dawson, please stick to questions rather than commentary. Dawson nodded respectfully. Officer Wilson, in text messages with Officer Brady, you referred to clearing out the neighborhood. What exactly did you mean by that? This question struck a nerve. Wilson's composure cracked visibly as he fumbled for an explanation. Just cleaning up crime, making areas safer. Safer for whom, Officer Wilson? The longtime residents you were arresting, or the developers who later purchased their properties. Wilson's response was the turning point of the trial. His voice rising with barely contained anger, he snapped, "Those people don't maintain their properties. They bring down values. Sometimes you need to clear out certain elements before neighborhoods can improve." The racial subtext of "those people" and "certain elements" hung in the air. Wilson seemed to realize his error immediately, but it was too late. Dawson pressed his advantage. So you admit that your policing targeted specific residents to facilitate neighborhood improvement, that arrests were a tool for demographic change. That's not what I meant, Wilson backpedaled, but his earlier outburst had revealed the truth behind his actions. Your actions and words suggest otherwise, Officer Wilson. Dawson presented a map showing Wilson's arrests overlaid with subsequent property sales to development companies. This pattern shows a clear correlation between your drug arrests and properties later acquired at below-market rates. Was this coincidence or coordination? Wilson's defensive response inadvertently implicated others. I wasn't the only one focused on those areas. This came from leadership. We were encouraged to concentrate enforcement in high-opportunity zones. This unplanned revelation caused visible concern among prosecution attorneys. Dawson pursued this thread. Who specifically encouraged this focus? Wilson hesitated, then named several superior officers and mentioned meetings where development priorities were shared with patrol commanders. This testimony opened the door to a broader conspiracy than previously established, suggesting official department policy rather than rogue officers. As the cross-examination continued, Raymond suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. Andrea rushed forward as he slumped in his chair. "Dad," Judge Washington immediately called for medical assistance. "Court is in recess. Someone call an ambulance." The courtroom erupted in chaos as paramedics rushed in. Raymond, pale but conscious, insisted on continuing despite medical advice. "I've waited too long for this moment," he told the paramedic, checking his vitals. "I'm not leaving until it's finished." Against medical recommendation, but with Judge Washington's reluctant permission, Raymond returned to the courtroom after a brief examination, an oxygen tank now beside him. His determination inspired a hushed respect even from those who had opposed him. The trial took another unexpected turn when former Sergeant Carl Jenkins, who had retired 5 years earlier, requested to testify. "I can no longer remain silent about what I witnessed during my time with the department," Jenkins stated. His testimony detailed long-standing practices of targeting black residents, fabricating probable cause for searches, and coordinating with city development offices about priority enforcement areas. "This wasn't just a few bad officers," Jenkins testified. "This was policy unwritten but clearly understood. Officers who questioned these practices were sidelined or forced out." Jenkins produced personal records documenting instances when he had reported misconduct only to have his concerns dismissed or buried. These records included names, dates, and specific incidents that corroborated many of the patterns identified during the trial. Additional evidence emerged from unexpected sources. A city planner feeling implicated by testimony about coordination between police and development interests provided emails showing explicit discussions about using enforcement tools to facilitate property acquisition in targeted neighborhoods. Judge Washington's growing outrage became evident in her questioning and rulings. When the prosecution attempted to limit the scope of evidence to Wilson's specific actions rather than departmental patterns, she overruled them sharply. This court will not artificially separate individual misconduct from the system that enabled and encouraged it. The interests of justice demand examining both. The district attorney's office, seeing the direction of the case, attempted to salvage what they could by offering Wilson as a scapegoat. They proposed a plea deal that would limit the investigation to his immediate actions and those of a few close associates. Raymond flatly rejected this approach when consulted. "This case has never been about one officer," he told Dawson. "It's about accountability for a system that has harmed countless people without the resources to fight back. I won't accept any resolution that doesn't address the full scope of the problem." Agent Wells announced that the FBI was expanding its investigation to include multiple jurisdictions where similar patterns had been identified. "What we've uncovered in Millfield appears to be part of a regional approach to law enforcement that raises serious civil rights concerns," she stated in a press conference outside the courthouse. The announcement sent shockwaves through police departments across the state. As Wilson completed his testimony, his final words revealed the mindset that had driven his actions. "I did what the job required. If some people got caught in the system, that's unfortunate, but I was serving the greater good as I understood it." Dawson's response was measured but devastating. "The greater good that excludes certain citizens based on their race is not justice. It's the very definition of systemic racism." As the jury began deliberations, Raymond sat with Andrea and Marcus in a private conference room, the strain of the trial evident in his exhausted posture. "Whatever happens now, the truth is on record," he told them. "That's something they can never take back." The verdict would come soon, but Raymond Thompson had already achieved what he set out to do: expose the machinery of injustice that had operated in shadows for too long. The confrontation had reached its climax, but the transformation it would spark was just beginning. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as the jury foreman rose. After 5 days of deliberation, the verdict was ready. Raymond Thompson sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table before him, while Andrea gripped his shoulder in silent support. "On the count of evidence tampering, we find the defendant, Officer James Wilson, guilty." A ripple of reaction moved through the gallery, quickly hushed as the foreman continued. "On the count of filing false police reports, guilty. On the count of civil rights violations, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty." Each pronouncement landed like a physical blow to Wilson, who seemed to shrink further into himself with each guilty verdict. By the time all charges had been read, 12 counts in total, 11 guilty verdicts, the former officer appeared utterly defeated. Judge Harriet Washington thanked the jury for their service before addressing the courtroom directly. Her voice carried the weight of 3 decades on the bench and a lifetime observing the justice system's strengths and failures. "This case has exposed not merely individual misconduct, but institutional failure of the highest order. When those entrusted to uphold the law become its worst violators, the damage extends beyond any single victim. It erodes the foundation of trust upon which justice depends." She turned her attention to Wilson. "Officer Wilson, you betrayed your oath, your badge, and the citizens you swore to protect. You targeted vulnerable community members based on race, fabricated evidence to secure convictions, and participated in a conspiracy that perverted justice for personal and institutional gain." Judge Washington then delivered a sentence that sent a clear message: 20 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. This sentence reflects not only the gravity of your crimes, but the need to deter others in positions of authority from similar abuses of power. Raymond was invited to address the court before proceedings concluded. He rose slowly, the physical toll of the trial evident in his movements, but not in his voice, which remained strong and clear. "Your Honor, what happened to me was unjust, but not unique. For every case that reaches this courtroom, hundreds more remain hidden in the shadows. Men and women who lacked my resources, my knowledge of the legal system, or my connections have had their lives destroyed by the same practices exposed in this trial." He gestured toward the gallery where community members who had suffered similar injustices sat. True justice requires not only accountability for past wrongs, but transformation of the systems that allowed those wrongs to flourish. My hope is that this case marks the beginning of that transformation not just in Millfield, but wherever similar abuses exist. As Raymond concluded, spontaneous applause broke out in the courtroom, quickly silenced by the bailiff, but reflecting the emotional impact of the moment. The courthouse steps became the site of an impromptu celebration as news of the verdict spread. Community members who had supported Raymond throughout the ordeal gathered with signs reading, "Justice prevailed," and "Change starts now." The aftermath of the trial brought swift and substantial changes to Millfield. The Department of Justice placed the police department under federal oversight, with Raymond serving as a consulting member of the Oversight Committee. His experience, both as a former judge and as a victim of police misconduct, provided unique perspective on necessary reforms. Officer Chen, initially ostracized for her testimony, was reinstated and eventually promoted to lead a new internal accountability division within the department. "Being a good officer sometimes means having the courage to hold other officers accountable," she told a group of police academy recruits. "Our loyalty must be to justice and the community, not to protecting misconduct." The healing process extended beyond institutional changes. Community dialogues between residents and police officers began addressing decades of mistrust. These uncomfortable but necessary conversations revealed both the depth of pain caused by discriminatory policing and the possibility of building new relationships based on mutual respect and accountability. Marcus slowly recovered from the trauma of witnessing his grandfather's arrest. His initial fear of police officers gradually transformed into curiosity about the law and justice system. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to be a judge like you," he announced one evening, "so I can make sure the rules are fair for everybody." Andrea channeled her experience into action, founding a community organization called Justice Watch that trained volunteers to monitor police practices and support residents navigating the criminal justice system. "What happened to my father showed me that justice requires vigilance," she explained at the organization's launch. "We can't simply trust the system to correct itself. We must be active participants in holding it accountable." Raymond established a scholarship for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. "We need diverse perspectives within these institutions to drive meaningful change," he explained at the scholarship's announcement. "The best way to transform a system is often from within." Wilson's conviction triggered investigations into similar practices nationwide. 3 other police departments in neighboring counties were placed under federal oversight after patterns of evidence planting and racial targeting were uncovered. Civil suits from Wilson's previous victims resulted in substantial settlements and vacated convictions, though no compensation could fully restore the years of life disrupted by fraudulent arrests and convictions. New training programs addressing implicit bias and constitutional policing became mandatory for all officers in Millfield. These programs, developed with input from community members and civil rights experts, emphasized that effective policing required community trust rather than fear. Wilson himself faced a reckoning beyond his criminal sentence. Civil suits from multiple victims depleted his assets and pension. His wife filed for divorce, unable to reconcile the man she thought she had married with the officer revealed in court testimony. His case became a cautionary tale taught in police academies nationwide about the consequences of betraying the public trust. The national conversation about police reform gained momentum, with Millfield frequently referenced as both a warning and a model for change. Legislative initiatives at state and federal levels proposed stronger oversight mechanisms, more transparent disciplinary processes, and enhanced consequences for civil rights violations by law enforcement. 1 year after the verdict, Raymond stood watching a new, diverse class of Police Academy graduates receive their badges. Officer Chen, now Lieutenant Chen, served as an instructor for the Academy, emphasizing ethical policing and community engagement. Among the graduates were several scholarship recipients from Raymond's foundation, young men and women committed to changing the system from within. "Do you think it's really changed?" Andrea asked, standing beside her father as they observed the ceremony. "Or are we just seeing what we want to see?" Raymond considered the question carefully. "Change is never complete or perfect," he replied. "But it begins with making the invisible visible, with refusing to accept injustice as inevitable." What happened in that courtroom opened doors that can't be easily closed again. Marcus, now 9 and growing tall, looked up at his grandfather. "Is that why you didn't give up even when you got sick?" "Because you knew it was important for everybody." Raymond placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Exactly. Some fights are bigger than just one person. Those are the ones most worth fighting." As the ceremony concluded, Raymond noticed Wilson's former partner, Officer Reynolds, now working in community outreach after testifying against his colleagues. Their eyes met briefly across the room, an acknowledgement of how far they had come from that traffic stop that had changed so many lives. The transformation of Millfield's justice system remained incomplete, the work of building trust ongoing. But in exposing the truth, Raymond Thompson had created space for something new to grow, a system that might, with continued vigilance and commitment, eventually deliver on the promise of equal justice under law. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if one person can really make a difference? Raymond Thompson's story shows us that courage, persistence, and truth can transform even the most entrenched systems. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories of justice prevailing against the odds. Comment below about a time when you stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that positive change is possible when good people refuse to remain silent. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most remarkable cases of justice triumphing over corruption. Until next time, remember that your voice matters in the fight for a more just world. Raymond Thompson's story teaches us that justice requires courage in the face of corruption. When systems designed to protect us instead perpetuate injustice, it takes extraordinary resolve to stand against them. True change demands more than exposing individual bad actors. It requires addressing the institutional structures that enable misconduct to flourish. Thompson demonstrated that age and adversity need not diminish our capacity to fight for what's right. His willingness to pursue justice despite personal risk created a pathway for others who had suffered similar injustices but lacked his resources and platform. Officer Chen showed that integrity within broken systems, though costly, is essential for transformation. Her decision to speak truth to power reminds us that one person choosing conscience over career can spark meaningful change. Most importantly, this case illustrates that racial justice cannot be achieved through passive hope, but requires active confrontation of discriminatory practices. The community's response, rallying around Thompson, creating oversight organizations, and demanding institutional reform, demonstrates that collective action amplifies individual courage. Real transformation emerges when we refuse to accept injustice as inevitable and instead view it as a call to action. Have you ever witnessed injustice and stayed silent out of fear? Or have you stood up like Raymond Thompson and Officer Chen did even when it was difficult? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to find their courage. If you believe in the power of one person to spark change, hit that subscribe button to join our community fighting for justice. Has racial profiling affected you or someone you know? Like this video to stand in solidarity with those challenging systemic racism. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that speaking truth to power can transform broken systems. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Remember, justice prevails when good people refuse to look away together. We can build a world where equality under law isn't just a promise, but a reality. Ada.